As you probably guessed already from the fact that I was talking earlier, you know who I am. I'm a consultant who spends a lot of time talking about live ops and helping managing games, and have been doing it for far too long. Billy, do you want to explain who you are and a little bit about Six Waves, but particularly I'm interested in helping the audience understand what you do with live ops.
Hi, I'm Billy from Six Waves. So I'm a game publisher, so mainly focused in Japan market and also Western market like English speaking. So particularly for live ops, I'm also in charge on the product side, so making sure that all of the game event running in the game are actually up to the standard. So we do measurement regularly to make sure that so for those live operations that we are running, matching the target that we want to set.
Thank you. Rok.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for being here. To be in this panel, it is a huge honor for me. I really appreciate it. My name is Roki. I'm from TouchTen Games. We make games primarily for women audiences. Most of our games we made are puzzle games that are for Tier 1 market. My role in live ops, the world of live ops, is that first of all, I'm a student of live ops, and then I'm a practitioner. So I would love to learn from the panel and from everyone, and also share what we have done.
Hi there, I'm Wandrille. I'm from the company Xtra. So we do provide live ops tools. So a lot of tools that you need to build good live ops and to manage them and to measure them. So.
I thought I ought to add one thing I didn't say before. So I literally wrote the book Games as a Service, so I spent an awful lot of time thinking about this stuff. So, I mean, Games as a Service is kind of a big thing, live operations, it's all intrinsically connected. But every different game, every different genre, every different audience has slightly different priorities. I kind of like to explore that a little bit. So, Billy, from your point of view, I mean, you talked a lot about Japanese games in particular. Is there something specific about the Japanese audience that affects the way you look at live operations?
So for Japanese audience, and also it really depends on different game genre. So for Six Waves, we mainly focusing on strategy game, pretty hardcore style game. So and then when we look at the live operation, so we kind of look at the engagement a lot. So we have to make sure that the user really engage into the game first, and then we think about monetization. So. And also we have to plan about, so we are not talking about like single live op event at one single day. So we might have multiple events on one single day. So we have to make sure that different event is targeting different segment of user. So for example, we should have some monetization events, so to drive revenue for the player, and also we might have like starter package for those newbies, so convert them from non-player to player. So different event can be happening on one single day for hardcore style game.
So I mean, I just want to explore that a little bit more. So I think what I've picked out of that, I think it's fascinating, is segmentation obviously is key, we know this. But you seem to be talking about the segmentation by the lifestyle of the player, as in the life cycle, I should say. So going from when they started, which is kind of the model I tend to prefer. So are they new? Are they evolving? Are they fully engaging? Are they super engaging? I kind of like that model. Do you use other models as well? For example, a lot of people are using attribution. So where did that player come from? And therefore targeting what you show them based on what other people who've come from that source tend to like. Which of those would you prefer, or have any views on that?
I seldom do in terms of the different channel, I would say, because when they go into the game, I actually look at how their in-game performance will be. So I segment based on their in-game performance, like the how engaged they are, and also or if they are the player or if they are the whales. Yeah. I seldom look at where they come from.
Yeah, I think that idea of looking at their buying behavior and realizing that there's value in players who don't pay. And it's not just the ad revenue, it's also the momentum that is created by their existence. In fact, the social value of they're an audience, you can show all the great stuff that they haven't unlocked yet. Rocco, when you start talking about casual audiences, are you seeing similar experiences, or is it different from the kind of hardcore people?
Yeah, I can say from my experience, I address mainly a casual audience. I like your approach, Oscar, of keeping the players first. So we're building experiences for the player. I think in general, for us, we look at it. We have three main pillars for operating live ops, and the first one is to make sure there's ROI. That's one. ROI in terms of, yes, getting players LTV higher, but also are there things that we can later on automate and make a duplicate of the same event with less cost, with less time. That's one. That's the first pillar, is ROI. The second one is to keep players happy, introducing new content, introducing seasonal, celebrating together with the players, and things like that, keeping them happy. We're building the live ops for the player. And lastly is about building a community, and this could be like inside the game or outside. So I think those pillars can apply across all spectrum of players, I think.
Oh, I totally agree. I think it's absolutely endemic in every game. I want to pursue this return on investment bit a little bit more. LTV is a really difficult thing to decide on, and I've seen whole talks out, half day almost sessions talking about how to calculate, LTV. I personally go for 90-day LTV just because it's simpler, but I know a lot of people don't like that because it takes out the longer tail, but I think it's quite a useful one. The other option I look at is the average revenue over a fixed period, let's say a year, but only looking at the people who played for 8 days or more. I know that's not necessarily a great mechanism. Do you have a preferred method to decide how you work out what ROI is in that context?
I also use the day 90 LTV. I'm still, figuring out what's the best, but I think definitely LTV has to be taken into account, both advertising and in-app purchase revenues, and I think tracking both revenues, if you're only tracking one, you're losing half of the equation, in my opinion.
Totally agree. And I think this is, in some ways, the biggest challenge of running live ops is working out what's valuable, because, as you said earlier, reducing costs is a key part of that. And designing processes, I think, is actually the thing that can save a game earliest. And the sooner you've got those processes in place, that's quite a lot of the consultancy we're doing now, is actually getting people to work out how to run those games in operation. I mean, again, this is where we're coming into systems and platforms.
Well, that's where I can jump in. Is definitely, if you can get into your game early enough, the few system, and they don't have to be complicated. They just have to be maybe very generic, and say, oh, I'm only doing one event every Sunday, which I'm going to give away one character, and that's, I have bonus multiply by 2, 3, 4 on anything. That can be done very easily, and that keeps people and players happy. And especially the one that you mentioned is, I call them the social whales, is they would probably never spend a dime in your game, but if one of these guys bring 5, 6, 10 other people to play and keep playing because he's involved in the community, is involved in what the game is, then that's a very valuable player for you, even if its LTV might be 0. But definitely having this kind of social mechanism is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think particularly if you think about, what Roki was talking about with the idea of ROI isn't necessarily directly attributable. Again, why it's so complicated to work out the kind of best way to do it. And I think you're right about that virality, that engagement factor that some of these. I mean, the thing I always half cry inside is when somebody turns around and says, "Yeah, you're leaving money on the table," because I just think. Okay, you've heard someone say that, haven't you? You don't actually know what you're talking about. But the reason I kind of cry at that is because understanding what it is you're leaving on the table is not just about the money. And understanding that the passion, the engagement, the authenticity all have directly attributable value to your success, but they're not necessarily numbers on a spreadsheet. And so how do we get, I mean, can we get that through data? I mean, can we look at behavior and start analyzing that? Is that where the crux of, I mean, I don't want to answer the question for you, but you go away.
I mean, I think that the most important thing is to be very conscious that it's important. You can always, I mean, it's very dependent from one game to another. So let's get back to the topic of the way you engage in a game is very different from one to another. So someone that plays 10 sessions a day or get to level whatever 60 or whatever a number of friends can be a very good way of, oh, what's the average number of friends this person has in the game? How many clans you have in the game? Because you can have 1 million players, but if you have 50 clans that are only active, that's very different than if you have 10,000 players, but all of them are extremely active. So, but that obviously depends on the kind of games you have. But definitely, these are data points which are very valuable to the usage and the social aspect of the game. And I always tend to say, I mean, there's probably 20,000 games that are released every month, give or take, worldwide. And well, maybe 10, but whatever. The point is,
still baffles me how many 1,000 a week is the last number.
The point is that I always think that the game is like a bar. You don't go to this bar or that bar because the beer is better or because it actually is the same beer. You go to that bar because you like the setup, because your friends are there, because it's nice to be seen in that bar, because the girl you like to meet is in that bar, and that's all part of a social experience, and that's very important. Your players have to feel happy to be part of playing your game, and that's a social pride around that. That doesn't translate to LTV at all.
I mean, that whole social identity theory, that I belong, I mean, that's so critical. And actually part of that theory, and part of what makes me feel like I belong, is that others don't. And so how do you find a way to feel like you're special because you belong? Interestingly, the others don't need to know they're others. There's a whole weird psychology bit in that. Anyway, let's sort of, so far, what we've described is quite complicated and quite big and messy. Does it have to be? I mean, can games, any game, run a live operations process? I mean, how can you get started? Do you have to go big or go home, or can you start small? Billy, what do you think?
So at the beginning, I would say you have to try out different things first. Of course, you have to think about the objective. So, for example, like you talk about the engagement. So you have to think about what kind of activity for your games is suitable for user engagement. So talking about engagement, if you want to look at the data, that's about session time, number of session, and also if there's any social interaction in the game as well. So you have to think of all of the elements in the game and then think about an activity to cover this area. So I don't think we have to think in the really complicated way first, and just imagine that you are a gamer as well. So what kind of entertainment you would want to experience in the game. So this is very important.
Yeah,
definitely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Definitely agree with Billy. You don't have to build something complicated. You can start off with a social media post on your page, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be built into your game, the code, right? So I think of live ops as an opportunity to experiment. What kind of things resonate well with your players, and it's a lot going to be about trial and error, hits and misses, but we always keep that in mind. Like, it's okay if we fail an experiment, at least we know something and we move forward. And yeah, it's just key to find something that resonates with a player. It takes time.
I think that phrase, it's an experiment, it really matters. I mean, increasingly I'm using the phrase design as a hypothesis. And the important thing I think about that is that I kind of take issue to the kind of we have to sort of just try everything, because we now have a lot of information about what works and what doesn't, and we can glean that information by just coming to events like this and hearing from people who've done it, but also just from looking at players and looking at data in our early testing process. And so for me, the more we can build into our early stage planning, particularly as we start doing our alpha, beta, and open beta and soft launch, we've got lots of testing cycles to go through nowadays for good reason, because we know it works, and we can use those as testing for how we keep people active. The same tools that can encourage people to try a particular system because we're going to be running the beta and we're going to test that thing today are the very tools we can use to run live operations later. So why not build them so they're flexible? In fact, why not build them so that they're in the server so that the live ops team can turn them on? I mean, is that fair, Wandrille?
Well, that's completely fair. So it's always good to have some kind of ideas of where you want to go and what you believe will be the path of the user. But this social path and the interaction of what will be with the events and the new stuff and how often these guys will be playing and what is the interaction with their friend and the other players is very important. And I think that's where a lot of game companies struggle these days. It's not the gameplay is not an issue. I mean, building a game is a lot of people know how to build games, but what exactly do you do with your friends inside the game? What social gain actually
what makes it matter?
Exactly. Why does it matter? Why having your clan number one on the chart does matter? Why do you keep on playing and playing over again? Because you give cards to your friends or because your clan becomes number one or whatever? I mean, why does it matter?
I think that's really an interesting one, particularly because you kept using the example of your clan being number one. Only one clan can ever be number one. So that means that 99.9% of your players can't be number one.
But they can be every week.
But it could be, this week's one, or they could be the regional one. They could be the one in this league, and that scale. I was going to use this as an opportunity to talk about scale, because I think actually what that hints at is that actually realizing the community that your players are communicating to is a scale opportunity. I think Golf Clash does an amazing job of this, but obviously Golf Clash is one example. This idea of being able to have tournaments and leagues and sections, so where we can separate out into groups of 100 people, so it becomes something that human beings can actually comprehend. Anyone heard of the Dunbar number before? So the Dunbar number is about 100 to 150 to 200 people, and it's the number of people you can hold in your head. Anything more than that, you can't remember. Because we evolved as creatures that could only exist in villages. And we've now got all these tools that help us. I have 9,500 connections on LinkedIn. So there's no way my brain can cope with that. But the reason I'm talking about this is because I think this is an interesting thing about the considerations we have to take into mind when we start thinking about our game scaling. So we talked about any game can do something. What's the biggest challenge when you start growing from a small number to a significant number? When
we just have a small number, then we don't have to concern too much about the social interaction among the player. But then when we grow bigger, so we have to rethink about our live ops strategy to see if we can entertain all users. So because when we have a lot of users, that means we have different segment of user. So for example, the top king. So we cannot having the live ops event just for that particular king. So we should have some event that for all of the users. So we cannot just think that, okay, those whales are important, so we have some event particular for them. So we cannot do that. Yeah,
you can't target just one group of people in that way without you lose on all of that scalability. But I think it's more than that. I think it's also that, you go from the point where one person can do the community and the social media because that's all you've got, to suddenly you've got to have somebody who's going to be there on holidays, somebody who's going to be available in different time zones, and it gets to a large number of people pretty quickly unless you're very smart about how you manage and schedule. Has this been an issue for you guys, or have you managed, or has it not been have you coped with, go for it.
It's definitely a happy problem to have,
yes,
but one that gives a huge technical headaches, right? And so like having 10K DAU to become 100K DAU, definitely you cannot expect the same level of service when you have the same backend setup. So thankfully, like you mentioned, also like there are services that are meant for helping you with this. So we the way we approach this is definitely like, let's team up and figure this out, rather than like, okay, let's figure it out all by ourselves.
I mean, that's the tragedy I think that happens too often, is that it's the not invented here syndrome, as I like to call it. You know, there's so many teams that don't want to introduce things just because they didn't build it. It's like, I mean, obviously you know this inside out. So, you know, how do we kind of, I mean, yes, people can build their own system, but how would you say what's the advantage of working with a third party? I mean, is there benefits for the learnings that you get from multiple customers, for example?
Well, obviously, we get a few insight from many different games of what you can do, what you cannot do, or what works with what kind of players. What's very important, as I mentioned in the presentation earlier, is that I believe we as a software provider give the right to games to fail. Because we all know that many games that you're going to launch will fail, and that's part of the process. And anybody that doesn't know that is not part of the game industry. And the whole thing is, if you spend a lot of time building stuff that are ready, then you're losing focus on what you need to build. Is that the game and the social intention of the game, right? So and this is exactly what we come up with. That it's ready down. It's ready there, go use it. And if you're successful, it's going to scale, no problem. And if you fail, it doesn't cost you anything or much. And that's the main thing.
I think that's
operation. I think, sorry to interrupt you, but in live operation, I think a lot of people are focusing on live, whereas I think the important part is operation, because it saves you money and it's processes.
One thing I noticed is I'm lucky enough that I've always been the kind of concept creator to mostly the ideas guy all the way to the managing the live service. But it's quite rare to have that opportunity. A lot of the development teams that you start are completely not suited for the day-to-day routine, and live ops needs to be about routine, needs to be about simplicity, I think. I mean, how do you address this problem of transition? Do you have different teams running different bits, or do you take the same team along?
So because we are the publisher, so we basically we have the in-house product team to help working on the live operation. So I would say for development team, they might not really strong in terms of live operation, because live operation, as you said, is really involve day-to-day operation, looking at the data, and then think about what type of event is suitable for the game. So it's really involve a lot of time and resources in order to think about the strategy. So I would say we should have dedicated team to work on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, for us, we are a tight-knit team of 30 people, and we're working on and we're focusing on just one game. And so for us, we are transitioning into a dedicated live ops team, but at this moment in time, we're still having our game designer running the live ops for us.
I mean, has that been a challenge? Because I know a lot of times, like I say, it's a sort of point where some games fail, not because the game's bad or the operations team's bad, but the team just fall out because they can't mentally shift. Has that been tension for you, or has that just been okay because you had the right people at the right time?
We definitely want to have a dedicated live ops team, and one that is empowered, able to affect change without having to rely too much on the product team. And so for us, it's been, it is work in progress, definitely. We do want to have a dedicated live ops team because I believe that, that's might be the more effective way of running live ops.
I mean, I think it's also arguably that there's a lot of the operational team are generally cheaper. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's just different types of personality. But I'd rather keep my coder, my genius kind of like designer types, making new stuff, and then let the boring stuff be looked after by somebody else or by an online system. I mean, I don't know how much though. I mean, how much can you offset realistically the workload, so that you could get less skilled, less experienced people or differently skilled people to run a game?
So I would say from what we've seen, the games we're running on the platform, if you have quite simple events, as I mentioned earlier, that the same event kind of a procedure every week, it's actually like a 15-minute job to set up the event. You're just like, set up this image, that sword, that tool from that date to that date. Press a button, and you're good.
You leave it running, yeah.
And you leave it, and that's it. So if you have fairly simple stuff, it can be extremely easy. It's when you decide to go like the way Contra work, like what we've seen earlier with Monty, when you have different, and what you're mentioning, different events, different prices, different and everything. That's where it becomes real operations. But you're already, when you already have a kind of a large game. So there's definitely different steps you can take, and actually Roki is working on that. Is okay, let's start with these small things that are easy, and then you add more, and then there's the process. As long as your game makes money, you can add more stuff.
It sounds dangerously like minimum viable product again. I'm a big fan of the lean, startup model in general, and I think actually this is really key to it, which is like, if you think early and you plan early, but you build the least thing that is viable, so not just the least thing. That's the mistake I think a lot of people do with minimum viable, is they make the smallest thing and forget that it's still got to be good enough. It's got to be good enough. It's got to be appealing and attractive and desirable. But if you do that minimum desirable thing and have built in enough variables so that you're, and actually this is where a talented live ops team can be amazingly creative. If they know where they can play, they can make relatively complex events and promotions, etc. They can tinker, they can in fact they can framework, so that all they need to do is define a set of framework events and then configure them and schedule them. And so that's why I think, again, it comes back to planning early, building your mindset in day one, and you save not just costs, but a lot of pain, and free the team that is going to do live operations to be amazing and creative and wonderful in their own way. Okay, so penultimate question before we close. I want to do a summary at the end, but the penultimate question is not all games don't last forever. Games sunset. What is there anything particular about the end of a game, when it's going to go? Any kind of particular advice you have on how you deal with turning a game off?
So we do have a lot of experience in terms of sunsetting a game. So basically, we have to, particularly in Japan, I would say, because of course focus in Japan. So we have to make sure that they use up their currency. Otherwise, we have to pay them back the currency that they pay the real money to get. So this is very important. So we will actually run some sales event right before we want to terminate the game. So make sure that the user consume the in-game currency. So I mean, this kind of important to bear in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to get somebody wanting their money back and you've just closed the game down, that's bad. Yeah, and I know we're working with Sony Japan with PlayStation Home. I was the home architect for PlayStation Home. When that closed down, that was quite problematic because a lot of people were very disappointed because they'd spent lots of money on assets. You can't use your asset if there's no game.
For us, we, as much as possible, continue to provide the best level of service we can to our customer service, and technical quality still needs to be there. And then for us as well, we work with people like someone like Six Waves and Billy, to a publisher who can care about the gamers as much as we do, to sunset the game in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I think that idea of being able to realize that communication is key and transparency is key in everything we do. Even, how we monetize, how we engage, how we find audiences. If we're not transparent, it becomes a problem when we sunset games. So telling people early, telling them why, treating them with respect, giving them time to use and enjoy the experience in its last wave, to make magic moments. In PlayStation Home, people gathered in gold suits, pockets with animation. It was the most expensive item that you could buy on PlayStation Home. Had an animation of money coming out the pockets. So people would congregate in islands to dance. And that was how they said goodbye to each other. It was like crazy. Anyway, so amazing stuff out there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I believe that if you have made a lot of efforts to build a game and to build a community, the best you can do as well is trying to get them to play another one of your games, one way or another. And I am a strong believer in cross gaming gratification. So say if you reached level 70 in that game, it's because you've played a lot that game, and that should give you a VIP treatment in the next game, whether a specific sword or specific whatever. I mean, Blizzard is very good at that. I mean, if you play some kind of events in one of their game, you can have specific characters on one of the other games, and everybody knows that you can only get that in that. So I'm very. I think it's very important for the players to say, oh, even though we're going to shut down the game, you still have a lot of respect, and you're still worth a lot for us in other games. Come play along with us again.
Yeah, if you really love your players, well, show it. I think hopefully what we've done in this session is shown you the different priorities, whether it's to do with the types of players, the cohorts, the life stages that they're in, the kinds of games that they play, and even the life stage of the game itself. So I'm going to ask the panelists to give us kind of a quick sort of one-sentence summary of what's the one thing that you would like the audience to take away from the session in terms of what's important for running live ops. Billy?
Keep try and error. So when we run live operation, you shouldn't avoid any fail. So because we have to keep try and error to test how the user are behaving in the game. So without testing, then we don't know how the user think.
Thank you.
I'm going to borrow your talking point, Oscar, to keep the players first and really think about it. I mean, we're all players here as well. And, design live ops with, try to put yourself in the shoe of the player and think, okay, what kind of cool things would I expect from a live ops event?
And on our end, we're a technology provider, and the best technology is where you don't see it. So,
absolutely.
So exactly. So so you don't have any login problem and everything. So the best is to make it smooth and clean.
So Rocky's stolen my one, but I'm going to throw a different one out. I'm going to go back to transparency and authenticity. At the end of the day, if we're making a game for players, we've got to live it. And if we expect players to give us money and we don't live it ourselves, when we're really missing out. So transparency and authenticity are absolutely key. And, actually, just one last thing, predictability. I think it's tied in. If we are not predictable, people won't trust us and they won't keep coming back. And if we want the game to last, coming back matters. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Cool.